So the consultants did look at the entire agency, and one of the areas they looked at was rail operator training and certification. And this is one of the areas where they said that the TriMet training certification program for rail operators is excellent and is considered an industry benchmark. There were specific positive areas noted, including the clarity and quality of the training, curriculum, and tools for measuring trainees' understanding of material. No recommendations were made by reviewers in this area, so that's something that the rail training department can be proud of. Rail standard operating practices, procedures, and rule book. They noted the complexity of the system. I don't know if you've seen our SOP manual for rail, but it's like this thing. It's got the side of the phone book. And we just recently, just after the green line opened, we put out the latest version of the rule book. It took us about a year and a half working with stakeholders throughout the agency to put out the new rule book, which has a lot of new safety improvements that we've incorporated into that book. Mainly, we merged the rail maintenance procedures and the rail transportation procedures into one rule book, so that everybody is operating by the same set of rules. And in particular, safety for trackway workers is something that we spent a long time working on. So they did make several suggestions to help provide clarity in those materials, and we're working on getting those updated.
Another one of the areas that they provided comment on that we'll go into more detail later are the bus stop guidelines. That's a document that we actually have on our public website, and it's a very often downloaded document by other agencies because we have a fairly exhaustive amount of research and detail into the placement of bus stops out on the system. It plays a key role in safety. As you can imagine, when we put a great deal of planning into locating stops, and then when you actually go out into the field, there are real-world scenarios which then can modify and present challenges to the best laid plans. There will be more findings on this in the Phase 2 study because K&J actually came to Portland and spent some time looking at representative samples in the field, and they'll be here later to talk more detail about this. But in general, what they found in this first review of them were that the specific language of safety, while present in the document, it was relegated to sections at the front and did not appear to be pervasive throughout the whole document. So they encouraged us to revise it. It also hadn't been updated since 2002. So our employees who are in charge of that process, they are going through and they're updating it right now. And it's going to really take safety into account throughout the entire piece. And it is a 4 to 5 page document or so. It is a very large document. But they didn't doubt the commitment to safety when looking at bus stop locations, but wanted us to guarantee the vigilance on it. So we're revising it in that way, and we think that will be good. Next, I'll move into this section on kind of industry best practices. And I say best practices in regard to some of them, but some of them, as K&J said, they are really too early to call them quite a best practice, but they're very promising pieces of early technology. And they've encouraged us, and unfortunately we don't have Mr. Birchfield here with the City Portland Traffic Engineering. He'll have a great deal of interest in this when we discuss it further later. But a couple, I'm going to go through 4 different areas that they've provided suggestions on. Buses carrying passengers should not be allowed to turn right or left on red signals, even if it is legal for motor vehicles at that intersection. So this is the concept that you have right now. Often in the city you'll see you have what are called permissive left turns, where it is a green ball and a walk signal that are concurrent. This means that a bus is moving through a left turn or a right turn, depending on which side of the intersection you're at the same time pedestrians are moving. In an ideal situation, you would separate those movements and have a dedicated pedestrian time where they're moving separated from the bus. One of the challenges of left turns, they point out in the study, is that in order for the bus for the rear duals to pivot around the corner, it needs to progress straight forward quite some distance, and then it pivots and the front of the bus swings in a rather fast and dramatic arc to the left into the crosswalk area. So that's one of the challenges it presents to pedestrians who may be standing next to the bus and assuming that the bus is going straight. Because of this and some of the other challenges of those left turns, in an ideal situation, they suggest you might explore working with local jurisdictions to separate those so that you have, and I'll be quite interested in Steph's thoughts on this, I'm sure we all will, given the implications on pedestrians and safe movement. But that is one area. Now, they did note that there was a 2002 study that actually contradicted some of this early thought that separating would be best. And that said, it was noted that there's actually a lower incidence of collisions on right turns on red, in which the right turn, on right turns on red, that right turns on green, because there's not a permissive pedestrian movement coincident with the red light. So I think what we need to do is look broadly at what are all of the different pieces of research on that and have that broad discussion. The second piece that they suggested we look closely at are innovative technologies such as embedded flashing lights in the pedestrian crossing. There are a couple of vendors that are providing this technology, which is quite literally in the pavement, and it would blink from below your feet. I don't know that any major cities are using these, and K&J did not report that there are any cities using these widely. But it's something that they suggest that we look at, and perhaps pilot studies could be used in some of these projects. Another area was limit buses to restrictive left turns only within designated areas. So for instance, in dense areas such as your downtown, can we look at requiring or separating those pedestrian and left turn movements where possible? And then the fourth area was looking at some innovative treatments, which some commonly call a pedestrian scramble or a Barnes dance. And that is where all of the vehicle movements facing an intersection would stop, and you would have the opportunity for pedestrians to move at all of the locations across. Some places actually even have it where you can cross corner to corner, what would traditionally be seen as a jaywalk. But by separating the automobile and bus movement fully from pedestrian movement, that you would have less of a chance of those interactions. Some people would argue that allowing those crossing in the middle might actually encourage bad behavior because you're moving people outside of the crosswalk area. But as K&J points out, there are many ways to implement such a thing, but really it merits a broader discussion with more stakeholders. Obviously, many of these items are things that TriMet could not do on its own and would require jurisdictional support. They looked at a number of different cities, including Cleveland, Des Moines, and San Francisco, in order to try and look at turning policies, and concluded that early evidence demonstrates that tools such as audible beeps, or there are also voice alert warning devices that might announce caution buses turning. They felt that though the technology is early, that coupled with a greater focus on training, these systems could reduce left-hand turn collisions significantly. So I think that is a topic that we'll come back to this group to discuss further. K&J also found that the majority of the agencies who were surveyed responded that they typically deal with turning hazards through the application and revising of rules and through increased operator training. That the actual installation of a lot of these progressive technologies is often not the route that many of these cities have gone with. And I think I'll turn it back over to you, Dennis.
Okay. The next area that they focused on was the Transit Change Review Committee urgent review process. TriMet has a standing committee referred to as the TCRC. And when we have incidents of a significant event, they hold an urgent review post-incident, usually within a couple of days once we've attained all of the necessary materials, reports, and so forth. A number of changes to the language of the SOPs were suggested by the reviewers to improve clarity, so we're working on those. In attempting to compare the TriMet urgent review process to comparable post-accident review committees at other transit agencies, they indicated that it was quickly evident that few properties surveyed could compare with the TriMet process. What they said is, though, that most properties contacted have review committees that make those committees, the evaluation process, the mitigation analysis, and recommendations were not as vigorously debated or analyzed as other transit properties as they were at TriMet. For instance, they compared us to Cleveland, Charlotte, Orlando, Jacksonville, Tampa, LA, San Francisco, maybe, BART, RTD in Denver, MARTA in Washington, D.C., Detroit, MARTA in Atlanta, Sound Transit in Seattle, the MTA in New York, and New Jersey Transit. So this is a committee that is primarily focuses on procedures and making sure that any changes that are made to the system, that we're working through a configuration management process to make sure that we're doing this consistent throughout the system and not just having people going off on their own, making changes to the system, bus and rail. Oh, sorry. And then they also talked about the system safety program plan. And one of the reasons they did that is in the best interest of improving safety at TriMet to focus on the primary principle of system safety. That is, a system and systematic improvements are the primary mode to improve safety overall at a transit agency. So one of the things that they talked about within the SSPP is that the manager of system safety currently is 4 levels down within the organization. And as Neil alluded to, we're looking at, as we get the new director of system safety and security that report directly to Neil. And so we have a higher stature within the agency and we get direction directly from the general manager. So the recruiting process is underway right now, and when that's completed, then that person will be reporting directly to Neil. Numerous language changes were made to the document for clarity, and then they looked at instituting a training quality assurance program, including one announced and one unannounced per year for bus and rail operators. In essence, that's going out and looking at how bus and rail operators are performing in the field. One announced examination, one unannounced. We do that to a certain degree now. We're just looking at more formalizing that in a way that they're recommending.
Mr. Chair, that's really our overview of the K&J Phase 1 report.